Hello and welcome to episode 40 of the LiveFitNow Podcast. My name is Vicki Brown and I am your host. Well, I cannot wait for you to hear today's episode. As you may have noticed, it is a longer one. We are back to having conversations with wonderful guests, and today is no exception. I think it is a wonderful time of year to chat with someone whose expertise is all about mindful eating, and I truly enjoyed having this conversation. There are so many moments of wisdom and little nuggets of gold that you can take away from you. I would love it if you could not only follow me here, but also to follow my guest today. She has her own podcast, of which I shall pop all of the details in the notes. There is lots more to come from both of us. So without further ado, I'll leave you with the conversation. My guest today is a weight management, eating psychology and nutrition coach. She has diplomas in nutrition and weight management certified by the Association for Nutrition, behavior changing coach, and eating psychology. She is also an NLP licensed practitioner and an accredited coach in young psychological profiling, helping people become empowered around food to enjoy their eating, manage weight long-term, and build nutritional health. Creator of the Mindful Eating Clinic and host to a brand new podcast, my guest today is Laurie Weber. Welcome to the LiveFitNow Podcast, Laurie. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm really well. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your podcast.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. So I always love to start these conversations with, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, what it is you do, and why you chose to specialize in it?
Yes, of course. Well, it was a bit of an accident, really, in that it was driven by my personal experience or the journey that I took myself on. So I had about 40 years of disordered eating. And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, because I think it's a term that's used quite a lot, isn't it, at the moment? It basically means that you're not eating in a normal way. It means that your pattern of eating is disordered. And so for me, that was a lot of binge eating. Sometimes that could be quite severe. That might go on for weeks at a time, but then followed by restrictive dieting, which at the time I thought was the way to correct that eating behavior. And I think that, like a lot of other people, I was living in this sort of cycle, which I had been doing for so long that I thought that actually it was quite normal, really. And I'd sort of said to myself, well, you know, you can manage it. You're okay. You only ever put on probably a maximum of a stone here or there. Nobody notices. You've got it under control in a very sort of uncontrolled way. And then I think I got to my mid to late 50s and realized that this had been going on since I was 16 and that I really had to do something about it. And so I applied some of my coaching techniques that I developed as a business coach and trainer to actually treat myself almost like a third party. I did a lot of reading, and it was at that point that I discovered this whole idea of how damaging dieting is. And I think, again, like a lot of people then and a lot of people now, the only option that they think they have to either correct disordered eating or to manage their weight is to go on diets. So reading all this information, I realized that actually it was the dieting that had actually been fueling the binging, actually, rather than the other way around, which was one of those big epiphany moments. And once I understood that, and I really picked apart what the behavior was and what was driving it at the time and all of that, and I used my psychology understanding to get inside my own head. Once I did that, I actually managed to cure myself. And so it was that success that then really, honestly, it was such a drive, such a motivator to say, there must be other people out there who have a similar experience with food, with eating, who are similarly troubled. Doesn't matter if they're not, binging like I was, but they're similarly troubled, sort of trapped in this cycle and fear of food, and that surely I can help them, and at the very least prevent that from occupying most of their life like it had for me. Yeah. And so that's really the background and the driver for then starting the Mindful Eating Clinic.
That's fantastic. And you can really see that, I think when someone goes through an experience themselves, you can relate to people more, and you just start to see things differently. Did you have a particular moment that made you think, I have to change this cycle? Was there anything was there a pivotal moment, or was it in fact just something that gradually happened over time?
I think it was the age thing. So I got to 56. I knew it had started when I was 16 because it started after a particular family event. And then I realized 40 years. And so I had to work quite hard not to be very, very upset about that. I mean, I was quite upset about it, but I had to say, right, okay, but that means that now is the time. You either do it now or it's never going to happen, because that was such a catalyst, because, I'm a reasonably intelligent woman, but this thing had been happening in the background for all this time. And that again is really, really common.
Yeah.
Lots of people who manage to organize their lives really well. They hold down jobs, they bring up children, they run their homes really efficiently, but they can't sort out the eating thing because it's like this other sort of gremlin going on in their life. So I think it was the time span, really.
Do you feel that it went from it controlling you to realizing you could and needed to take back control of it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think through that process that I went through, that I put myself through, I managed to turn. It's almost, I'm quite visual when I think about things, and it was like the eating was absolutely huge, almost like this big, I don't know, shadow, or this big cloud, or this big bubble, and I was quite small, and that this bubble, or this, I think I talked about it like a blanket with a client the other day, and she said, God, that's exactly what it feels like. I feel like I've had a fire blanket thrown over me, and like I'm inside struggling, and this behavior is completely dominating me. And so during that process, which was actually probably only about 3 or 4 months, which is not that long, if you do it right and you know what you're supposed to be doing, and obviously that's now what I help other people with, it is possible. It's all about understanding. And so during that process, I then became bigger, and this behavior then began to shrink away to the point where, I mean, very, very occasionally over Christmas, it was quite tricky. And then during some of the lockdowns, which we experienced in 20 and 21, of course, there were moments when my little voice says, oh, this is what you need to do now. But it's so tiny that, it's like the size of a walnut comparatively. And I just put it back in its box because I know how to do that. And it doesn't get in the way at all. So you do, yes, exactly, experience this shift of control. And when you get to that place of empowerment, honestly, the feeling of liberation is absolutely incredible, where you don't have to fear carbohydrates. Ooh, bad word, dirty word, you don't actually have to fear any food. You can eat any food you like. No food is bad, no food is good. It's just food. It might have better nutrition, but it's not good or bad, and it's that. So all of this stuff, all of this diet mentality stuff, you can absolutely correct through a process of changing how you think and how you reframe it all.
Absolutely. And that whole narrative of good versus bad, it comes up time and time again, and it's associated with so many things, but I think food perhaps more than anything else. And
I'm sure that you must hear it in your work. You must have people
yeah.
that will say, oh, I've been really bad, so I really need to work hard. And it's like, no, that's not what food is.
Make sure that we avoid that negative narrative.
Yeah.
And that's with everything, I think with emotions as well.
Mm.
And it's just a very literally negative cycle to get yourself into. And the way of being able to put a positive spin onto things and understanding and accept these different things rather than making something good or bad, and then the narrative that gives to you and how you approach things can be so powerful. And I think you can get stuck in the cycle and not even realize just how big an impact it's having on you.
Yes.
And also your consequential decisions because of how it's made you feel about yourself. So yeah, it just does that good versus bad thing comes up so much. And very, very rarely does that kind of narrative work for anybody. There's a few people, I think, that for whatever reason it keeps them on track to where they want to be, but for most people there's no doubt it's just takes you down that slippery slope of negativity.
Absolutely. And I think that in order for anybody to change behavior, to reform habits, they have to start from a positive mindset. So if they're feeling bad about behavior, or bad about how they ate yesterday, or bad about the fact that they didn't train yesterday, for example, that's not a good place to start. That's not a healthy, it's not a positive motivation. So a lot of the work that I do starts off with looking at the climate for behavior change in someone's psyche, and trying to actually encourage them to let go of past behaviors. If I can let go of 40 years of doing that stuff, then anyone can let go of any period of time. And that's such a key thing. And I'm sure that happens in your work too. It doesn't matter the place that someone has been, whether they've exercised very little, or no matter how much weight they have, or anything. It's just totally irrelevant, isn't it? Because we're starting now, and we're going to do, well, in NLP terms, we call it towards motivation. So we're always looking to think about, what does that new behavior look like? What's that new version of me? Whether it's a fitter version, whether it's a different eating version, it's a generally healthier version. We're always inspiring to maintain that behavior. And that's another really important thing about this. So when I work with people, I try very hard to break them away from numerical goals. And in fact, they can get on the scales if they want to, but I don't tell them to do that. I'm not really particularly interested in what they weigh, unless they want a nutritional assessment, in which case I sort of put all of that into the scientific process. But generally speaking, if it's about eating behavior, what they weigh is irrelevant. And I try and encourage them to focus on what they aspire to be, or how they want to behave around food, and really get them to visualize that in the most detailed way. And then of course they have the ability to then conjure that up when the moments are difficult, because that visualization, as we know, in things like sport, motivation is incredibly powerful.
It is.
I think it's possibly quite cliched, isn't it? But I've heard runners say, I see myself crossing the line, I see myself winning, I see myself running past everyone. And it works. It absolutely works.
It's just a demonstration of just how powerful the mind is. And I think so often people will time and time again approach something, whatever the goal might be, with the mindset of how they've always approached it.
Yeah.
They have an identity within it, like they are the person that goes on to the diets, and they are the person that binges, for example, if we're talking about nutrition. But for that cycle to be truly broken, it's about letting go of that identity. That is how you behaved in the past, but how do you want to be? What do you want your identity to be in the future? And if you keep your focus forward, you allow yourself to change. Whereas if you keep thinking about what you did in the past, you're restricting yourself. You've almost got you're tying yourself back into the past. And I think once you can unleash yourself, you can take either very small steps forward or perhaps massive leaps, because you are thinking of yourself as a different kind of person.
Yes. And I think that for some people that takes a certain amount of confidence. So some of my role, as I'm sure yours is as well, is about inspiring confidence and about inspiring that belief that it is possible. And I guess that's where my personal experience helps enormously, in that I can, demonstrate that it is possible. And I think also encouraging people to trust themselves and to trust a more intuitive way of behaving around food, when, we've spent decades and decades being told that the only way is by dieting. So surely that must be right, because billions of people do it every day. Well, no, it isn't. And, the dieting industry is worth billions because people keep coming back. But of course, people keep coming back because that's, in a slightly perverse way, it's what they are used to. And what we are used to, even if it's damaging, is comfortable. And so we don't really want to break out of the norm. We don't really want to check. Although we want the end result, going through that process of change can be really quite daunting. So it's incredibly complicated, but fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Of course, everyone is different. And so every experience, every journey, every viewpoint is unique. And that's what makes it such interesting work. And when somebody gets to the point where they say to me, I've had 2 weeks where I haven't really even thought about it, I'm like going, because they've got to this place that I call food freedom, where you can just eat, love it at the time, not beat yourself up afterwards, not think about what the next thing is that you're going to eat, not be obsessed by how many calories you've had, just flipping well eat, and just enjoy it. And of course, with all the mindful eating principles about hunger and only eating when you need and what you need, everything settles eventually. There's a lot of science out there about weight set points and things, and if someone has been on quite a roller coaster of dieting, it can take a time for the body to actually settle, but it does. It knows where it wants to be. And if you fight against it, it's just, well, it's harmful psychologically, but in the end the body just rebels, because it'll actually hold on to more fat, because it doesn't like the famine, and all of that stuff. And I can talk for hours about it, but that's the basic principle of it, that we're trying to get back to much more of an intuitive way of eating, where we have got this food freedom. And if we're not hungry, we don't eat. If we eat a little bit more one day, we will find that we don't need as much food the following day, because the body knows. It's really clever. It's such a clever organism. We should just,
amazing.
So quite a lot of this, although it's quite psychology focused, quite a lot of it is about, right, switch off the brain, turn the subconscious off that's telling you, that you need to go and do something because it thinks that's what you need, and listen to the physical side of it. Listen to the physical side, convert that into mental signals and act on those instead.
Exactly. There is nothing more powerful, I think, than realizing you've got it all inside you. It's all there. Like the word that just stuck in my head when you were saying, for so many people, it's about confidence. And it's so true. People do not have the confidence to know themselves, or the fact that maybe you don't know yourself that well right now. But if you give yourself the time and space, you can get to know yourself and you can listen to what your body's telling you, because it is a phenomenal thing. And we are unique. And that is where the problem of, as you said, the diet culture and just a lot of things within our society, so many people lack that confidence. So feel that they have to be told how to do something. Like,
Yes.
Tell me exactly what I need to eat. Tell me exactly what I need to do. And yes, someone can tell you some of those things, but what is that really teaching you? Is that allowing you to understand? That person can't actually tell you how you're going to feel. As much as there's stereotypes, we can all have we can guide people well, I think. But when it comes down to it, you are the only person that knows what's right for you, if you've allowed yourself to become more in tune with yourself and listen to yourself. And this constant, and as you say, the industries are all based upon this, selling the secret, the thing you must know. If you know this, you're going to be fine for life. And that's just not how it works.
Yes.
You know, intuitively, you do know what you need. You just need to step back and allow yourself to find it with the right guidance, I think.
I think so. And I think it is about the tools, and it's about doing the process in the right way. But, you know, I absolutely understand anybody that goes on a diet.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain security, and of course you believe it because you want to believe it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, as you've just said, Vicki, you know, someone is telling you what to eat, and inevitably at some point life is going to take over and it's going to be difficult to sustain it. You haven't managed to get to the shop, so you haven't got the right thing that you're supposed to be eating on that particular day. And then what happens? Then you're left to your own resources, which are exactly the same as when you started the diet. They haven't changed. And it's the resources that, as you say, the internal resources that we need to help people fix, so that they understand that they've got all the resources, all the tools, all the ability inside themselves, and they don't need to go on any kind of regime or, you know, set of detox shakes. I mean, don't get me started on them.
That's a dangerous topic, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think, you know, the important thing in all of this process is that people don't chastise themselves, that they just accept how they've behaved around food previously and understand it and say, okay, I get why I did that. It's not my fault. It's not me. It doesn't define me. It's just a behavior.
Yeah.
And this is such an important thing, to try and break people away from the feeling that they are bad. They are not bad. They are good. They are lovely, lovely, good people. They just have a difficult relationship with food. And the two things are separate.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, I feel like a massive part of it that I think we completely forget is our environment. The environment we live in now is constantly bombarding you with, from one, I mean, you think about, we've just obviously come over Christmas. Before Christmas, you're being bombarded with all this luxurious and decadent food and alcohol and all of the stuff that you get before Christmas. As soon as New Year's hits, then it's the flip side. All the diets are coming out, and it's like we are constantly being shown stuff and convinced this is what we need, and then we need the opposite, and then they're trying to sell us this and they're trying to sell us that. And we have an abundance of food also, of which half of it now, probably more, has been designed to make you want to eat it and keep eating it. So to feel like, oh, I'm so bad for eating that food, it's like, well, no, our bodies and our minds, once we start eating that food, is designed to want it. So if you have lost that connection with yourself, you might find it harder to readjust how you look at the food. But it's not that you're bad or lazy or any of those things. We actually have to fight against our own society now, which is all about quick, processed, and ultimately probably just too much food. Like the amount of food we can buy now, and we're so lucky to have such, you know, free access to the abundance that we do, but in fact it makes it harder to eat the amount that makes us feel good not because it's just on our plates.
Yes, I think so. And I think that that advertising is incredibly powerful, and by its very nature, advertising is competitive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how many times in an evening do you see a Just Eat advert?
Oh, it's crazy now.
3 times every single evening. It must be. It's all the time. I got that song in my head.
Yes.
You know, and it's like, go away. I don't want to order Domino's pizza. We were watching something the other day, and the little ident going into every program was this JOMO, joy of missing out thing. This whole thing about, hey, you're at home, order a pizza. You know, pizza's great sometimes, absolutely great. It's really tasty, and it's when you want pizza, have pizza, for heaven's sake. But, you know, don't ram it down my throat in the advertising all the time.
Yeah.
Because it just gets in your head. And I think that you're absolutely right. The advertising takes us on this roller coaster of encouraging us to indulge and then telling us that we really shouldn't have, and this is what we need to be doing now. You go, help. You know, so there's quite a lot of resilience that we need to develop, actually.
Yeah.
That says if you break down Christmas is probably 2 days, maybe 3 on average, where we're going to really enjoy fantastic food, and then we just get back to normal. But it's the whole culture of saying, oh, okay, it's the 1st of December, I need to buy my first family box of Quality Street, you know, and that lasts a week, and then you, oh, well, maybe less, but, you know, and then you buy the next one, and you're right, it's about piling it on. And of course, in these adverts, you see this table that's, you know, as big as King Arthur and his, you know, however many knights, you know, and it's like, it's just going to feed an absolute army of people, and it sort of creates this idea, doesn't it, of excess. And also the really serious point, I think, is that it creates in people a sense that if they don't provide that kind of food or that quantity for the people around them, they are not having a proper Christmas, or they're letting other people down. And I think that is wicked.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is really implied in a lot of the advertising.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing with advertising. And I guess that is the goal of advertising. They are planting the seed as to what you want your life to look like, or what your life should look like.
Yes.
And yeah, it is dangerous. And again, you're disconnecting from yourself and the things that you enjoy. Now, for some people, that may be what they enjoy to do, but I bet it's not most people's dreams. Everyone has their own vision and things that they love about Christmas. And I guarantee for a lot of people, it's not the food.
Yeah. But I think the food thing takes over. You know, I think if we think about advertising more broadly in this whole context of what we're discussing this morning, is that advertising, of course, also has a really big part to play in the whole body image, body love, body satisfaction cycle. And sometimes I have to work quite hard with people to say, well, are you really sure that you want to lose weight? Tell me why you want to lose weight, because I'm looking at someone who is perfectly fit, perfectly fine, you know, but in his or her head, they think that they should be another stone lighter. Really try to get to the bottom of that and explain that actually this whole intuitive mindful eating thing, quite a big part of it is actually saying, right, well, what is the weight that I am comfortable with, where I can eat mindfully, not restrict, and that's where my body wants to sit. And sometimes that is a higher weight than people think that they should be. And again, that goes back to the dieter thing, this whole numerical goal, you know, and sometimes BMI has a negative factor to play in that, because it's often not accurate, as I'm sure you know. You can be working with someone with a high muscular density who, according to BMI, is in the obese scale. I think, no, hang on a minute, that's not. I mean, BMI has its place as a starting point.
Yeah.
You know, but
it's flawed.
It is flawed. It is flawed. Yeah. So I try to also discourage people from aspiring to unrealistic aesthetic goals, and try and say, okay, here's the choice. You live like this and you stay at, let's say, at 8 stone for a woman, or you live like this and you stay at 9 stone, and talk about benefits, consequences. And in fact, sometimes when I get to the point of them saying, God, you're right, I don't want to live in this constant cycle of having to worry about everything I put in my mouth. I'm going to go home and I'm going to take all my size 8s, all my size 10s, all my 12s, whatever they might be, and I'm taking them to the charity shop because this is now me. And honestly, you see, I have women in tears because they're going, oh God, just to let go of the pressure of saying this summer I'm going to fit into those white jeans. I've just taken them down the charity shop. I feel so much better, and these are not heavily overweight women at all, and it is just wonderful. You can see the whole, lightness that comes over them where they just let go of it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think so many people's goals are based on these, ideals of what's shown to them. But I don't think it is at all clear what it takes. I think so many people's goals are, in fact, they're either based on what they were when they were very young. I think that's very often the case. They want to get back to where.
That's true. When they got married or.
Yeah, exactly. When they were a teenager, essentially, older teenager years.
Yeah.
Or they obviously have seen these images and they think they look beautiful and all those things. And let's ignore the whole Photoshop side of it. Let's pretend it's what they actually look like. And then you break it down and you say, you're essentially admiring an athlete who lives and eats like an athlete. Do you want to live and eat like an athlete? Realistically, if you've got a job and kids and that isn't actually what your main focus of life is, you're not actually going to want to do that. And I think once you can truly associate what each thing means to your life, you can actually really choose then what it is you want. And then you can readjust your goals and have a realistic goal as to where you want your life to be and what you believe your life can be, because it will fit.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is where it comes back to behavior. How do I want to live? So my little strapline is think, eat, live, with the underline live. It's just so that people make a decision to change around not being obsessed anymore, around not being dictated to by food or by trackers or by diets or by any of that, just to let go completely. And if you eat mindfully and if you have a nutritional awareness, you will not eat too much. You just won't. And I think sometimes what is a little bit difficult about this whole concept is that compared with being on a diet, it isn't particularly structured. It is quite, so sometimes I have to make the psychology a little bit structured, because that's what a lot of people want and that's what they're used to. As you said earlier, they're used to being told what to do. So some of it is quite direct coaching in that way, so that people, do have something to hang their hat on. Because if I just say, well, just eat when you're hungry, that doesn't really help if you have a history of disordered eating. So you do need the steps and you do need the processes, but ultimately, once those are in place, we are looking for this goal of food freedom.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually, I'd like to come back to something you said when we first started this conversation. And I've got a two-pronged question really here.
Okay.
What is the idea of a normal eating pattern? and what would be a common sign of disordered eating?
Okay. So a common sign of disordered eating would be, there are quite a few actually, but so for example, someone who would overeat like I did, so binge because of an emotional driver, perhaps because of something situational, and then the following day would go on a very restrictive day in order to compensate for that, irrespective of what their hunger cue is like. So most people with a disordered pattern have lost quite a lot of connection with whether they're hungry or whether they're full. A disordered eating cycle would be that somebody is afraid of eating certain foods, because if they eat a piece of cake, they won't be able to stop and they'll have to eat the whole of it. Again, because that is completely unrelated to whether they're hungry or not. So the eating of that cake is probably emotional eating rather than physical eating. So anything I would say that isn't hunger driven mostly, and I just hesitate because sometimes we eat because of an emotional driver, and that's fine. It's just that if we respond to an emotional driver with food all the time, then that's going to give us a problem.
Yeah.
So
becomes your go-to at that stage.
Exactly. So we need other go-tos, and we find other go-tos by breaking down what those emotional triggers are, understanding the emotion, where it came from, and then saying, okay, so this is what it is. This is how I'm feeling. And we have to acknowledge those feelings. That's really important. Whereas dieting and overeating pushes those feelings away for that particular moment, overeating particularly. We need to actually embrace them and address them. And then we can find other things to do that replaces that. Anyone who cannot eat something without knowing how many calories are in it has disordered eating. Anyone who has to track after they've eaten and see how many calories they've eaten in that day has disordered eating. And what was the first part of your question?
What is considered a normal eating pattern?
Oh yes, sorry, yes. So normal, and I know this is a podcast, but I'm doing the whole inverted commas first finger thing here. Normal would be that we are responding to whether our body needs food or not. So it's about tapping into those feelings of physical hunger and then eating slowly, enjoying the food and stopping when we are full, even if that means that you leave something on the plate. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening who, like me, were brought up with parents and grandparents who were told constantly that there were starving children in Africa and that we had to eat everything that we were given. And, you know, if you grow up with a culture of it being impolite not to eat everything, or, you know, is there something wrong with you? Or, like I say, be grateful for the fact that you've got a really hearty meal. That's quite difficult to break. And that's one of the things that I explore when I look at people's relationships with food, because a lot of it starts when they're very, very young. Things like that dinner table culture, you know, and how they may have been compensated with food or rewarded with food. You know, those are all behaviors that will carry on through life. That's why cake is a treat or chocolate is a treat, because it's something that we were given in that way, with that emotional context. You know, so a normal eating is in response to hunger and in response to fullness, and just eating whatever you fancy at that particular time. But the caveat is that obviously if we fancy Mars bars all the time, we can only eat, we can eat a number of Mars bars, which means that we don't put weight on, but nutritionally we're not really doing ourselves any favors. So it's always underpinned with thinking about how nutritious is my plate. And I like an 80-20 idea. So 80% of the time, I'm really looking at making choices that I know are going to fuel my mind and are going to fuel my body. 20% of the time, I'm going to have pizza and I'm going to have chocolate chip ice cream and I'm going to love it. But I'm only going to have as much as I need. And that's really the key. That if you don't restrict, if you allow yourself pizza, for example, and you eat mindfully, you probably don't need a whole one, actually. If you're applying proper mindful eating principles, you probably get to about halfway through. And if you're listening and you've learned how to tap into how you feel, you probably don't need any more than that. And then you put the rest in the fridge and you warm it up for lunch the next day. And that's great. And gradually these behaviors and this attitude to food starts to become embedded. Small changes, I always say small changes are much, much better to actually fix. So small habit changes to fix a bigger behavior, and then gradually you get to this food freedom place and you don't even think about it. And you're not self-conscious. And you're not saying, oh, I better not have any more because it's another 500 calories. No. That's got nothing to do with it. You're not going to have the other half of the pizza, because most pizzas are about 1,000 calories. You're not going to have the other half because you don't really need it. You don't really want it. You've had enough and you've loved it, but that's it. History. Move on.
Yeah, I love that approach. And it's interesting because I can tell you're definitely not into calorie counting, which is so often the case because I think you become disconnected. But I guess one of the most important factors here is for the education to know what food is giving you. Because I actually, and again, sometimes you're in your own soundboard and you forget all the things that you've actually learned. So what things are normal to you and not for other people. And it is astounding how many people, even people that have been on diets, don't actually know what different foods give us. And, obviously it is our fuel, and it's important to know how it gives us different things. Do you think it's really important for people to understand what food gives us and why it gives it, we need that stuff? And I think when you can see that there are lots of different benefits to different foods, you realize that actually you want quite an inclusive diet. So you're getting all of those little things that you need, the macronutrients. And how do you think is a great way of approaching that, to learn and understand about food without then becoming obsessive that you have to get particular amounts of certain foods? That was a very long-winded question, but hopefully
no. Yes, I understand, because what we're trying to do is to discourage people from being too nerdy about it if it gets to the point where they're obsessive. So I use language like eat the rainbow, which is very simplistic, but basically says, if your plate is beige, then it probably could do with some other color, which is going to be, green, which is going to be vegetables, or is going to be red, which is going to be tomatoes or peppers or something. So that's quite a good way of doing it. But on all my online courses and on all the work that I do, I talk about the 4 major food groups, and I talk about the value of those, because quite a lot of people that I work with have decided that all carbs are bad, for example, or that all fat is bad. So I talk to them about the value of those foods, and always try to talk positively rather than negatively. But I will talk about saturated fat and the consequences of having too much saturated fat. But I try not to talk about, grams per person, per build, per kilo of body weight. But I will, if I think I'm working with someone who's not going to get obsessed about it but is really interested, then I will talk about it. But I would tend to say, so for example, if you have butter on your toast and you have a dollop of creme fraiche on your dinner, that's probably all the saturated fat in a day that you that you need, but actually you don't really need any at all, and that you should be focusing on your polyunsaturated, which is this. So I try and talk about the foods rather than the labels. I say olive oil is really great because of this, and and I will try and encourage them, as you say, to have as broad a nutrition as possible. And I'll also talk about all the micronutrients as well. And in fact, when I first started doing my Instagram posts, I talked a lot about the labels rather than what they did in the body. And now I talk about the food, and I don't really talk about phytonutrients or antioxidants or stuff, but I say, but this is really good because actually that's what most people want to understand. They're not really interested in the scientific part, and why should they be, really? It's all about, why should I still eat carbs?
Yeah.
And understanding which carbs have a high sugar impact and what a high sugar impact does on the bloodstream, and all of that kind of thing. So I try to be selective but positive and also helpful. So that's what I do with most clients. Some clients really want to know how well they're doing. So sometimes at the end of a series of coaching sessions, which can be 1 or 2 or can be 6 or more, someone might say, God, I have changed how I eat so much and I feel so much better. So, this, let's not forget, it's also about physical health, and the better fuel you put in, it's like any car, any kind of machinery, the better fuel you put in, the better all those physical processes are going to actually work. So they actually are really keen to find out how well they are doing, and then they will do a 7-day food diary for me, quite detailed, which is a little bit onerous, but if they want it, then they're quite happy to do it. And then I feed all that into some very, very clever software, which is much cleverer than me. I mean, I could sit and do it by hand, but the software is much easier. And it spits out this 10-page report that actually analyzes everything and looks, it's based on the recommended daily amounts of the macro and the micro. So it's not from a nutritionist perspective where somebody might have a particular condition that needs more of a particular nutrient. So I need to make that clear. But for the average person, it just analyzes everything. And, some people absolutely love that. And they're really interested to see what they're eating is affecting what they should be having based on government guidelines. So sometimes I do get into it, which I quite like, but the majority of the time, it's about giving people sufficient information to encourage them and to inspire them to eat different foods, without overloading on the science, or, as you say, without them becoming too obsessive about it.
It's context for all of it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's interesting, and it popped into my head while you were saying that. It's the whole good and bad thing can be used on its head, can't it? Because there actually are a lot of people that become obsessed with all those things that we're told are really, really good for us, and they eat lots and lots and lots of that food. Avocado is the thing that's popping into my head at the moment, probably because it's behind you, but
yes.
It is one of those, things that we are told of all the benefits, and those things are absolutely true. But if you're eating a couple of avocados a day, it's probably gone a little bit too far, and it's putting everything into context, isn't it? Even those things that have been proven to have, scientifically to have benefit to us, that doesn't mean that's necessarily all we should be consuming. And again, it's just trying to find that balance between all of those things. And I think that is one of the things that makes people feel overwhelmed. There is so much information out there. It's trying to step back from the noise.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's really important for people like me to actually just encourage little changes. So if obviously one of the first things that we talk about is, okay, so just talk me through your average day when you're working. What sort of thing will you eat, and what's happening at this moment, and tell me about this gap between this and this, you know, what happened, was it a feeling, was it a situation, you know, and all of that. And so the first thing is just to start to make little tiny steps, because you're right, you know, otherwise it is totally overwhelming. And in fact, I don't really give people eating plans. I don't give people food plans. I don't tell them what to eat. I want them to give me a list of things that they really like to eat, and things that they are deliberately avoiding for out of fear of weight gain, or because of some other misinformation. I encourage them to put those back in to their diets. And in fact, I'm working with someone at the moment who has a real problem with eating bread, and we are gradually introducing bread back into that diet, so that fear doesn't exist, so that we get back to what we talked about earlier, that whole sort of normal eating thing. But you know, for some people it is just little steps, and also discouraging them from it ever having to be perfect. There is no perfection. It's just going to be as good as you can make it on that particular day at that particular time. And if you're out and about and you're hungry and all you can get is a Snickers, but you're so hungry you need to eat something, have a Snickers, you know, and not worry about it, because it's still calories, it's still fuel. Yeah. You know, you'll cope, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to put 2 pounds on, you know, and of course, getting on the scales is another whole big thing of this. For most of my clients, I will say, do you have a loft? And they go, yes. I say, right, well, could you please put your scales up there? Go, oh, no, I can't. I won't know what's happening, is what they say to me. I go, well, I know you won't know what's happening, but, and then I talk it through, because that's another really important thing to this whole concept, this whole approach, is to trust yourself and to not need a scale to tell you how well you're doing. I mean, it's so damaging. So quite often I have to hold people's hand through that, because it's such a security blanket. Yeah. In some respects, but then on the other hand, it's so damaging.
Yeah, it can set people's whole day up, can't it? You know,
oh crikey!
Many people, it's either going to be a good day or a bad day, simply based on what that number was in the morning.
It can sabotage their eating faster than anything on this planet, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And the reasons why you could be 2 pounds heavier on that morning are, you know, tenfold. And probably right down the bottom of the list is what you ate yesterday. You know, all sorts of reasons why you might be carrying extra weight, which we possibly don't need to go into. But, you know, there are lots of reasons which have nothing to do with your eating behavior. And that is the key thing.
No, and again, I think it all comes down to education, and probably the main reason I wanted to start this podcast in the first place is I think everyone has a little bit of knowledge, everyone has a little bit of education, a lot, unfortunately, that comes from mainstream, which is why diets, etc., are so massive. But there is so much missing. And those massive big holes in our knowledge banks are the things that allow us to focus on these things that make us feel really bad. But actually, if you start to just understand and learn all these other things that go on, you know, particularly if you think of a woman over a month, there's so many things that change. Yeah. They literally have nothing to do with your eating, or they may in fact impact your eating because of your hunger levels changing throughout the month.
Yes.
But they are things that we need to understand so that you can accept them and not feel this guilt or worry or bad feelings about the fluctuations, because actually that's just our bodies working and doing what they should be doing.
Yes.
It's a completely different thing to eating too much bad food or whatever. You know, it's all about filling those gaps of education, I think. And there's so much to know, but I think it's worth it. I think we almost need to have enough information there, not to overwhelm ourselves, but just understand what's going on.
Yes. 100%, absolutely. And I think that, you know, in a way we have these wonderful things called bodies, and the more that we can become aware of how to get the best out of them and live our best lives, the happier actually we're going to be. And for most people, it doesn't take a massive change. You know, it's not about turning everything on its head at all. It's about replacing. And I'm always really keen to not use language like, right, you need to stop eating this, you need to stop eating that. And I'll say, right, well, how about replacing this with this? And they'll say, oh, no, don't like fish. Right, okay, well then how about this? And of course, part of my job is to try and be creative. You know, when you've got someone say, oh no, don't like that. Okay, so right, you know, I'm thinking, okay, so how else can we get omega-3 into this person's diet? You know, but sometimes just encouraging them to just try something different, or to, I think one of the obstacles to trying something different and to making those little changes and to becoming more educated is often the situation at home. So sometimes women particularly don't want to be eating something different from the rest of the family. They don't want to have to cook 2 meals, and their husband or their children like a certain foods, you know. And so part of my work is also applying that creative and pragmatic approach that says there is no point telling this person to eat a food that either he or she doesn't like, he or she can't afford, which is really important. And that's a sensitive thing that all coaches like me have to be very aware of. Doesn't have the time to cook, and is going to make them feel like some, you know, weird outsider at the dinner table. So quite a few conversations will be around what the family likes to eat, and again about introducing other things, might just be adding more veg, and perhaps reducing something down, so changing the quantity of the main food groups on the plate.
Tweaking,
exactly. Little bit of subtle tweaking. And of course, if those changes are possible and sustainable, then that builds more confidence, it builds more trust in the approach, and it then dispels all that feeling that it's going to be really difficult and that I'm going to have to, you know, eat all this weird green food, you know, that this person's going to, and I don't really like kale. Do I have to eat kale? No, you don't have to eat kale. You know, it just sort of, because it's all about, this whole thing is about making it possible for people and believing that there is a different way that they can behave around food and that they can nourish themselves just a little bit better, which will have a big impact on how they live.
Yeah, I love it. It's so simple really, but it's hard to put it into practice for people.
It is, and I think people just need to be steered in the right direction. Sometimes that's just 1 power hour on the phone, and then for other people it's, you know, a series of half an hour, or it's an online course, or, you know, and actually it doesn't matter. My whole ethos is just trying to help people. And in fact, if they have a little bit of time with me and they never need to come back, hurrah, you know. I'm not, unlike Slimming World, I'm not banking on people coming back every 5 minutes. I want to be a victim of my own success. That's what I want.
Oh, I love that. Now, there's a question that I love to ask everybody, and it's, are there any common myths in the diet and nutrition world that you would like to debunk?
Gosh, well, I think people think that diets work. I think that's really quite a big one, because that's what's sold, isn't it? You know, this, all the aspirational stuff. So I think that is the big one, for people to understand that diets in the long run, for at least 80% of people, do not work.
No.
That's a big one. And I think another big one, sorry Vicki.
Sorry, do you think some of it's the phrasing? Because I've always have had a slight problem with the word diet, because after all, what we eat is a diet. So diets are the problem. we need to think about our diet. Do you think?
Yes, exactly. So I think it's dieting doesn't work. I mean, I try and use the word restrictive a lot because then it's very clear what I'm talking about. Because any dieting regime, if it's for a weight loss purpose, I'm not talking about something that is about treating a physical condition, but anything that is for a weight loss purpose is by its very nature either going to restrict your food options or is going to reduce or restrict your calories or is going to restrict how you live. So yes, I agree, because we say how to have a healthy diet. So we're using the noun in a different way, aren't we? So yes, it's a shame that we don't have a different word. Maybe we need to invent one. And I think this has been debunked quite a bit, but one of the big conversations that I have is around carbohydrates, in that people think that carbohydrates make them fat. And this is fueled a lot by celebrity.
And the food industry itself.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of celebrities out there who I could name, but I won't, who have lost a lot of weight and have written books about it and have said, the only way I can keep my weight down is by not eating carbs. And I just put my head in my hands, and that's because there is so much nutritional benefit from whole carbohydrate. I'm not talking about cake or biscuits or chocolate. I'm talking about whole grains, quinoa, brown rice, brown pasta, really good quality brown bread. You know, I mean, it's just, you need it for fuel. It's essential. Your body needs glucose. You know, your body needs to get, and carbohydrates are the best source. You know, other foods do get broken down in the same way, but carbohydrates are the most immediate source, and all that whole grain goodness is just fabulous. They also a lot of those whole grains also have protein in. Something like quinoa, you know, is an absolute brilliant food. I don't use the word superfood very often, but there are a few that are. Quinoa is one, broccoli is another. You know, my husband hates broccoli. I have to force feed him broccoli.
Oh, little trees. Oh,
Eat it raw. I just love it. But anyway, yeah. So I think those are the main ones. Yeah, those are my main ones, I would say.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's a question that popped into my head, and it's an interesting one as to how you get yourself out of a particular mindset into another one. So if you are working with someone that is clinically obese and they are at the point of having health conditions because of it, and their goal is ultimately to lose weight to return to a healthy weight,
Mm-hmm.
how do you approach that in as far as they may feel that they need to eat more than their body actually needs to? How do we change that cycle to allow themselves to ultimately lose weight without becoming obsessed with numbers?
Well, I take quite a lot of the responsibility for that on myself, in that with someone like that, we would do a food diary to start with. And I would look at what they're eating, how they're eating, and the quantities. So on a practical side, I would make recommendations in terms of the type of food that they're eating, because some of that might be fueling overeating, particularly if it's high fat and it's high sugar. So that would be running alongside, but then also there would be some work going on around positivity and around confidence and around actually having perspective about how long it might take to get to a particular goal. And provided that their healthcare professional is happy with a slow process, talking about what that slow process is. So sometimes people who are clinically obese and are at that kind of stage, they may well be under a doctor.
Yeah.
And sometimes doctors will put people like that on a very low calorie diet to get them kick started. And I'm not going to interfere with that because I'm not a medical practitioner. But what I have done is that I have worked with those people alongside that low calorie regime that they've been on up to a certain point. So they might be on, say, something like 800 calories a day in order to lose a stone, to take them out of that, a real red danger zone.
Yeah.
And as I say, I don't get involved in that at all, because that dynamic approach is about putting off a particular health condition which could be fatal.
Yeah.
And obviously a GP or a nutritionist understands more about that. But what I do sometimes is that people who have awareness will come to me and say, okay, I'm under the doctor, this is what I'm eating, but can you help me with how I got here in the first place? So I help them with all the psychological part, which sort of runs alongside. And the theory, therefore, is that when the 800 calorie regime goes and maybe another plan comes in its place, we've already put some key steps in place, or some key strategies in place, that means that new meal plan, and then subsequently at the very end of that journey, when they're then left to their own devices, which of course is terrifying for some of these people, that they've got the strategies to be able to tap into their hunger and to be eating the right things for all of the right reasons. But that tends to be quite a long process. And I have had a client that I have done that with successfully last year. And then, you know, that's an ongoing process with a couple of other people as well.
That's great. I guess ultimately the point is you address the disordered eating.
Yeah.
However, whatever size you're at and whatever type of disordered eating you have, if you can get to the psychology behind that and figure out why that's happening and how you can approach it differently, that is how you then become empowered to eat differently in the future and change your future.
That's right. Yes. And also to help some people come to terms with what life is like if they do weigh a lot less, and what the possible obstacles and challenges might be to that. Because people get used to being defined by their behavior and by how they look and by how other people react to them, or how they perceive other people react and think about them. But I do just need to say here that if ever I'm working with someone and I think that they need help from a professional psychologist, I will refer them. You know, because whilst I've done my diplomas, you know, I don't have an MSc in this stuff. And if I think that there is some very, very deep rooted troubled stuff going on, then it would be totally unethical and unprofessional of me to try and unpick that, because I do not have the skills to do that. So I'm, you know, I think for all of us, it's very important that we know what our boundaries are.
Yeah.
And within those boundaries, I can still help and support loads and loads of people caught up in this dieting and this disordered cycle. And I can unpick sufficiently the eating psychology to help 90% of people. And then the other 10%, I have people that I can refer them to who I know will help them.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And I always have this one big question that I like to ask people, and that is, what inspires you?
Oh, well, that has to be my clients' successful outcomes. Absolutely. You know, that's why I do it. As I said at the very beginning, it's about preventing people from having any period of unnecessary disordered eating in their lives, because it does not need to be that way. So that is what inspires me every single day, to get myself out there, to be a complete pain on social media, you know, to be making YouTube videos left, right and center, and just to be saying, come on, I can help you. It doesn't have to be like this. That is my driving force.
Oh, I love it. That passion is inspiring. And
oh.
In fact, I'm going to take that moment to, where is the best place to find you on the internet? And I will pop them all in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so my website, themindfuleatingclinic.com, is where you can find details of all my services and my coaching packages and a little bit more about my ethos. And then I have a YouTube channel where I've got coaching videos and a few tips here and there. I have 2 online courses. One is Simple Steps to Mindful Eating, which is a really good introduction to tapping into that awareness. And the other one is How to Stop Overeating, which has been very popular recently. And then I am on Instagram, The Mindful Eating Clinic, and on Facebook and on Twitter. And I also have my own very new podcast channel, which you can find via Buzzsprout or Spotify. I think that's it.
Right, I will pop all the links into
Thank
show
you.
notes. And you know, if there was one tip you could give people to start eating in a more mindful way, what would be the place to start?
Slow down. Slow down. Eat more slowly so that you can enjoy it. You can have awareness of what it is that you're eating, and you can also have awareness of when you've had enough.
So simple. I love it. These things are simple, aren't they? So I would like to, I hope I haven't just asked the question that makes this more difficult, but I would like to finish off by giving you the floor to share one thing that you think everyone would benefit from knowing.
That you get out what you put in. So the better you fuel your body, the better your mind and your body will work for you, and the better life you will live.
I love that. What more do we need to say? Can I just say thank you so much for your time today? I have absolutely loved this conversation.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk in such depth about something that means so much to me, and that I know is present in a lot of people's lives, men and women alike. So I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Well, there we have it, episode 40 of the Live Fit Now podcast. Thank you so much for listening to that episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation that I had with Laurie as much as I did having it. Thank you again for listening all the way to the end. Please don't forget to either subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast platform that you are listening to this podcast on. If you could review and share with your family and friends, it is the best way to help spread the word of the Live Fit Now podcast. If you have any questions for myself or Laurie, you can contact us on social media. Just click through on the show notes. You can email me direct, hello@livefitnow.co.uk. And please remember that you can now support the ongoing creation of the Live Fit Now podcast on buymeacoffee.com/livefitnow. Anyway, thank you for your time today. I can't wait for you to hear the next episode. Until next time,